Hey everyone, Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to episode 265 of the Property Podcast. So for the last couple of weeks, we've listened to some amazing investor journeys. And between them, they've got loads of experience. So we have them back on this week to give their secrets to success. And keep listening to the end, because we also got a couple of charlatans to give some advice to.
Yeah, thank you for joining us on the Property Podcast, where every week hubbers come to get informed and inspired. This week we've got some hard-won lessons from people just like you. People who are out there, doing it, having successes, having failures, and today they're sharing the one most important thing they've learned along the way. So that coming up in just a minute after today's news story.
So Rob, it seems that the government are big fans of being part of the Property Podcast because they seem to dominate our news stories nearly every week at the moment.
Yeah, another week, another crackdown. I've completely lost track of what's going on, to be honest, because new things are being announced all the time. Every week there's a new press release about something, and because it takes such a long time for anything to actually happen, there's lots of it where it's like, oh, I thought this had already taken place, but actually they'd announced an intention to do it once, and now they're announcing that they're actually doing something else with it, and then eventually they'll announce that it'll happen. So this week they snuck out an announcement that seems to have bundled together all manner of different things. Some of them look new to me, some of them are just re-announcements. And it also bundles together letting agents and leasehold matters. So if we start with letting agents, they're talking about compulsory client money protection. That's something we've heard about before, but they're talking about that again, and it's going to happen apparently in early 2019. They're also talking about the need for letting agents to have a mandatory qualification, every member of staff to have one. Now I think this one is new, and that sounds similar to what they've got going on in Wales with Rent Smart Wales, where everybody in every agency who's got anything to do with property needs to have this qualification. It's pretty basic, but better than nothing, you could argue. So that's on the letting agent side. Also lots going on in terms of leasehold. Leasehold is the real hot topic of the moment. There seems to have been a lot of press about it, so the government's keen to look like they're doing something about it and possibly actually do something about it. So among what they're talking about doing is a system to help leaseholders challenge unfair fees, including service charges, support for leaseholders to switch their managing agents when they're not performing, and the requirement for those agents to undertake development and training. So these are all proposals that are going to be talked about by a working group. The final proposals are going to be drawn up early next year. How long it's going to take from those final proposals to actually becoming law, goodness knows. So it all sounds like pretty reasonable stuff. Probably will happen because they seem to be pretty dead set on making these things happen, but just don't hold your breath because it's going to be a while until it all comes in.
Yes, and don't be surprised if the government ends up making the news again next week. We'll see. Before we jump into the main episode this week, just wanted to say a huge thank you to everybody who got in touch, whether via social media or email, regarding the last few weeks' episodes on the journey. Definitely a more ambitious project for ourselves here at the Property Podcast, and we're glad that it went down so well. We're also extremely grateful for all the feedback that was given to help us improve on those podcasts too. So thank you so much.
Yeah, we're so glad to have got good feedback on these episodes because we felt it was so important, because for the last 5 years or so, we've just been chatting about property and you've just had to take our word for it that it is a worthwhile thing to do, and there are lots of other people out there doing it. We say it all the time, but it's so much more powerful when you can hear people who are actually on their journey. We also say all the time that it's not easy. We've never claimed that property is a way of coming in and very quickly making a whole load of money and then having a brilliant life. It can be a grind and it takes some time. So that's why it's so good to hear from people who are on that journey. They've all had some measure of success, but they've all had challenges too. And they're working through those challenges now. And over the coming months, you'll hear them working through those challenges. And you'll realise that these are people just like you. It's so easy to assume that people who are having success in property are different in some kind of way, that they're special, that they had it all figured out. But over the last couple of weeks, we've heard that nobody's really got it all figured out. Some people we heard from started more deliberately than others, but none of them has come in, had buckets of success and then sailed off into the sunset. The only difference between them and you, if you haven't started yet, is that they have got started. They have taken action. They're making progress, and at some point, they're going to reach their goals. Well, they'd better, because we're going to be tracking them, so they're going to be pretty embarrassed if they don't. So we think there's loads that you can learn by following these hubbers on their journeys. So we've gone back to Sarah, Ian L, Steve, Chris and Ian B and asked them one question. We asked them, what is the one piece of advice that you wish you knew before you started? And in this episode, we're going to share their answers with you.
So let's start with Sarah. You'll remember she's originally from New Zealand. She's got a couple of buy-to-lets already and is also planning a couple of flips in the next 12 months. So let's hear her advice.
Oh, that's a good question. you don't have to know everything straight away. You do learn as you go, and just have the guts to back yourself, really, because it is pretty much like you've got to break a few eggs to make an omelette sort of situation. You've got to just get in there and try, and then you'll learn as you go. But as long as you've got some kind of fallback safety measures in place, like you're not going to be bankrupt at the end of it if it all goes wrong, then just, give it a crack, because it's worth it.
Great one to start with, because it's all about taking action. And we completely agree. We've echoed this many times on the podcast, but so many people fail to do it, so it's great that Sarah's identified it. It's the getting started for so many people is the hardest thing to do. Once you've overcome that hurdle, then actually it's a lot easier, because you're locked in all your thoughts and emotions before you start on what it might be. But once you've taken action, it's just reality. And often the reality is nowhere near as scary or as intimidating as you kind of thought it would be before you get started. And the key, Rob, here is, well, books are fantastic, and there's several of those you should be buying, and the podcast is useful, and the forum is useful. There's a way of learning much better than anything we've put out already, which is experience.
Yeah, the difference between understanding something intellectually, like reading it in a book and going, oh yeah, that makes sense, and then actually having it happen to you, it's worlds apart. You get a far deeper understanding of something when you've actually done it yourself. And you also figure out how things work for you. I think it's really difficult to know in advance how you're going to react to certain things, how you're going to feel if a tenant doesn't pay their rent, how confident you're going to be negotiating with a builder if you think you're getting ripped off. It's very easy to hear someone else's experience or hear someone talking about how great property is and go, oh yeah, I'll be able to do that. But then you just don't know. Everyone's different, and you get to learn that lesson when you do it. What I really like about Sarah's advice is that she's not just saying, yeah, go for it. She's balanced that out as well. She said have some kind of fallback measure in place as well. So if it doesn't work, you're not going to be completely down and out. So Sarah's not saying, sell your house, cash in your pension, go nuts, and it'll all be fine. She's saying, get started, but do it in such a way that if you do have challenges, and you will, you'll be able to get through them. Hopefully everything sorts itself out. It's a good experience overall, and then you just keep going. But if for any reason it is a total disaster, you haven't burned through all your assets and put yourself in a really difficult position. So experience is the best teacher by an absolute mile. You need to get started to have that experience, but you don't want the lesson to be too painful, so protect that downside as well.
So next up is Ian L, and you'll remember he was the guy who turned his drinking circle into a HMO business.
I think the most important for us has just been having the right people around us. As I say, our mortgage broker that we've been working with from the start, although careful not to give us advice, as it were, has steered us away from a few things that would have been disastrous and tied our money up in terrible places for a long time. So having the right people around just makes all the difference.
Yeah, so Ian had an unconventional start to his journey, and he said how he met his mortgage broker in the pub. And normally, taking mortgage advice from some bloke you met down the pub is probably not the best idea. But it worked out for Ian, and he's still working with the same broker now, and it's been absolutely invaluable to him. Mortgages are particularly important because leverage is one of the great things about property investment. But if you've got plans for using leverage that turn out not to work out, it can really, really affect your progress. You could end up having to pull out of purchases due to a lack of finance. You could end up with cash tied up that you are planning to reuse. It can be pretty serious. So a broker is a critical part of the team, but that extends to solicitors, to agents, to handymen. When it comes to property investment, you are the team captain, but it is a team sport. What I really loved about hearing Ian's journey is it was such a social thing for him. It came out of his social circle, and he's continued to keep it that way. He clearly loves that side of it, and he's put together his team and his contacts really naturally. That's obviously a real strength of his. But having the right people around you, however you meet them, however you interact with them, is absolutely critical.
Yeah, sometimes referred to as the power team. Having that power team can make all the difference between your endeavours in property investment being a success or a failure. So spend the time building that team. Don't necessarily work with the first mortgage broker you meet or the first letting agent you bump into. It's about doing your research, asking around, getting recommendations, meeting these people or speaking to these people, get a feel for them yourself. Do you trust them? What's your guts? What's your radar saying? And then after you've done all this and you've put a bit of research in, start testing them out and see how it goes.
Now, Steve, you'll remember, has been investing on the Kent coast. He's got a few properties there, and he's been saving like mad to get his next deposit together, and he's trying to figure out where to buy next.
I think at some point you've definitely got to go for it, but at the same time, you can't be lazy when it comes to due diligence, and I think that's something I learned over the course of the last 3 flats that I've purchased. research is so important in terms of the area, in terms of what you want out of your investment, and in terms of looking into the potential pitfalls that could come with it.
It's that research point again coming back, but it's so important, and Steve's talking about it just in a much broader context here. Now, Steve is like many investors now looking to invest places that aren't local or on their doorstep. So having that team, but doing that broader range of research, digging in deep to understand the local area, the properties you're going to buy, what the market's like there, what its potential is, all that research. It's not location. Steve's absolutely nailed it. It's research.
We talk about the importance of research a lot, and sometimes we get a bit of pushback from people like, well, how can I get research? What should I be looking for? How do I know if someone's telling me the truth? And it is difficult, of course it is. But Steve didn't come into this with any particular knowledge. He works in the media, nothing to do with property. He doesn't have access to any special sources of information, but it's just something that he worked really hard at. For Steve, the saving up has been a real grind, as it has been for a lot of people. And for that reason, he wants to be really sure that he's putting his money in the right place. He did that when he invested in Kent, when he lives in London, and he's now going to do it again when he moves to investing in the Midlands or wherever he decides to go next.
Okay, next we've got a man who's buying himself a block of flats as a wedding gift to himself, and also has the ambition to own 100 properties outright. Yes, this guy certainly caused the stir when we told his story last week. This is Chris.
Yeah, when I started, I like many people, I had really no idea. The one thing I would say is podcasts and the internet. Podcasts for me is like you guys, listening to you guys, but there's so much free information out there. And on the flip side, there's so many sharks out there. I have been to various one-day events for property trainers. And given my background in working in financial markets, we're generally quite skeptical people, I guess, and we like to do our due diligence. And when you go to these one-day sales pitches for property courses, and the people that are up on stage are telling you about how good their experience has been, you can quickly check their name on Companies House to see how long their businesses have been open, what their profitability is roughly. You can get a rough idea of what their assets are and how profitable their businesses are. And these sales pitches are spilling off numbers that sound unbelievable. And in some cases, they probably are true. But when you search on Companies House and the person has opened up 10 companies and 5 of them have closed in the past couple of years, I think it's very easy to be skeptical of the success stories that you're being pitched in order for you to sign up to a course that costs £3,000 to £5,000 or whatever. So the one thing I would say for new investors is do not sign up for courses. Use all the free information, buy books, listen to podcasts, get on websites and look on all the forums. There's so many people out there that are willing to give free information or meet for coffees, and you don't have to use a large percentage of a deposit that you could be using to buy a buy-to-let.
So a couple of weeks ago, we dedicated a whole episode to the subject of courses because it's such an important subject. If you haven't listened to that one, definitely do go back and check that out. But I think Chris has absolutely nailed it here. And having a built-in skepticism about what you hear is really healthy. And it goes back to the research point. Chris has been really smart, getting on Companies House, checking out the background to the claims that are being made. Because you do hear some pretty unbelievable stuff. Some of it, I'm sure, is true, but a lot of it will not be. And it's incredible how many people just take these claims at face value. Courses can be great. You can get really useful information that way, and it's part of the education mix. But we're constantly coming across people where it feels like they need to do an expensive course. It's like they can't believe that they can just start doing it. They need someone's permission. There must be some secret that they don't know that they need to spend a lot of money to get. Or even worse, you occasionally come across people who can't invest because they've done a really expensive course and spent all their money. So I think that's absolutely fantastic advice from Chris. And Rob, like he quite rightly says, there are so many people who will happily give you lots of advice with no ulterior motive at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, you've got all the resources we'll hand out week in, week out, but there's so much more out there than just what we do. We're a drop in the ocean. The Property Hub meetups are a great example. They're filled by just enthusiastic people who love property, who just help each other out. If you've not been to one of those meetups yet, get along. The amount of knowledge you can absorb in one evening is phenomenal. So many people who are just out there doing it week in, week out, active investors you can learn from. The majority of people in property love sharing their knowledge for free. Love it. It's just a weird industry that seems to attract a few people who found a business model by selling expensive courses that don't deliver a lot. Yes, there's some great courses out there, but unfortunately we have to talk about it because there's so much rubbish out there. And finally, we have Ian B. Now, Ian's had quite a career in construction, so what would normally terrify mere mortals like ourselves, Ian is able to take in his stride.
I suppose it's not a technical thing, it's more of a philosophical thing. It's to have an open mindset as opposed to a closed mindset. So, an open mindset that you can, no matter what happens, you can find a solution to a problem. Even when people say, oh, it can't be done, or you can't do this, or you can't do that, then there's always a way to do something. It might not be the way that you want to do it, but if you've got an open mindset, it means you're focused on looking for a solution, whatever that solution is in what format or whatever format it takes. Whereas a closed mindset just see so many people with the closed mindset that don't move forward. You've an open mindset and then say doing everything with a good intention.
What a perfect way to wrap up the advice that we've heard in this episode. Mindset is another topic that we are not shy to talk about, and for good reason. As Ian's identified, it's so important. Ian's got a wealth of technical knowledge. There'll be a lot of people listening to his journey, me included, who are a bit jealous of that. And he's able to go and take on projects that other people would just not be able to do, or at least would have to wait years and years to build up to. But that would all be for nothing if he didn't have the right mindset. When we heard from him last week, he mentioned stoicism, which I'm a big fan of, but which is essentially just dealing with things as they are. That doesn't mean not planning ahead, but it means when something goes wrong, and it will, not getting overly bothered about it and just dealing with it and making the best decision you can at the time. And he's also identified the challenge of keeping that attitude despite all the people who will tell you that things can't be done. And you're never going to shake those people off. I'm constantly being told that things are impossible that I'm doing right now. And it's not that what I'm capable of doing is any different from what someone else is capable of doing. It's just the attitude around it. And I'm sure on lots of occasions I'm on the other side of that and I believe something is impossible that somebody else is able to do because they've been dedicated enough to learn how to do it and figure it out and not let anyone put them off.
Absolutely agree, Rob. That's the key to success in life, is your mindset. It's as simple as that. Your success in life is down to your mindset. Probably could do a whole podcast on that, but let's leave it there because it's so important. Let that sink in because it's true. I can assure you, any success that Rob and I have had is not through talent. It's through mindset. So Rob, before we wrap up, I'd love to hear what one lesson you'd give back to your old self if you're starting again. What would you do? What would you teach yourself? What would you go back and say?
It's kind of hard to verbalise it, but I think it would be to listen to myself a bit more. And what I mean by that is there's been lots of times over the years when I've formed a belief about something or come to an opinion about something, but ended up not acting on it. There's so many examples of this, like not buying more during the last crash. And over the last decade, multiple occasions, not buying in areas that I've identified that I think are going to do well. And on lots of those occasions, I've talked myself out of it, either because I've listened to other people, or I've just not listened to myself and not had the confidence to take action on that thing when nobody else is talking about it. And I'm sure there's been lots of other occasions where I've had a belief about something, which nobody else has had, and then I've been wrong. And it's been a good thing that I haven't done that. But it's probably telling that none of those are coming to mind right now. All the things that I can think of that I regret are things that I haven't done, not things that I have done. So I think it comes right back to what Sarah said at the start. Even when you don't know everything, and you never do, you just have to have the guts to back yourself. And I think there's been lots of occasions in the past when I haven't backed myself and should have done. So I think if I could go back in time, I'd say, you feel like you don't know it all and you feel like you don't have the confidence to do this, but that's never going to change. In 10 years' time, you're still not going to feel like you know it all. So you might as well just do it.
It's so easy to talk yourself out of a decision or a deal. There's always a reason you can give yourself. I think it's brilliant that that's coming from you, Rob, because so many people will be looking at you and what you've done and what you've achieved in property and will be thinking, wow, if you've experienced that, then it's not so odd or so weird that that's happening to me as well. So if you're listening right now and you can identify with that, note it and maybe try and push yourself on a little bit harder over the next few weeks and months into taking some action.
Okay, Rob, same question back at you. And we got to know each other pretty well over the last few years, so I've got a pretty good idea of what you'd say, but let's hear it.
I don't think it's going to come as any shock, Rob, But it's just because it's not been said today, and I think it's so important, and links really hand in hand with some of the stuff Ian said towards the end. But it's have goals as well. It's absolutely imperative that you've got a great, strong mindset, a lot of self-belief. That's awesome. Having that will really set you up well for success. But the perfect partner for a great mindset is goals. Having goals can really change your life. We talked about it on the podcast, how goals can change your life so many times, and it's because it's true. So make sure you get really clear on what you want from your property endeavours, what you want your journey to deliver you. Because the journey can be great, and the journey is the most important part because that's the most fun. But the journey may grind to a halt, and you may stop investing altogether if you don't have that end goal in mind, that very clear end goal. That means something to you. It's not just, oh, well, I'd like to retire, but you don't really want to retire. You just feel like you should say it. Having a goal of meaning and then having it clearly defined and then a path to working towards that goal will mean you will be a far more successful investor. So my piece of advice to anybody starting out right now is if you aren't very clear on what you want from this, get clear before you start.
So there you go, some great lessons from the people who we're following along their journeys. You're going to be hearing lots from them over the coming months. Loads you can take from their advice and loads you can take just from hearing their stories as well. They're all people just like you on their journeys. They might be a little bit ahead of you, they might be a little bit behind you, but there's something that you can learn from all of them to make you a better investor.
It's time to thank a pair of wonderful hubbers who've left us a 5-star review on iTunes. Thank you to the hundreds and hundreds of you who already have more 5-star reviews than any other business podcast in the UK, and it's down to you guys, so thank you so much. And starting off this week with Christina. Christina says, thanks Rob and Rob for this great podcast. The content is always engaging, easy to understand and up to date. I would not have started in property without your help, from saving strategies to goal setting, sourcing, financing and tax. Your podcasts have proved the perfect guide throughout. I now own my first buy-to-let, held a limited company, and hope to add more in the coming years. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Christina. And also thank you to Neil, who says, a fantastic podcast full of worthwhile information presented in a fun and engaging way. It's a quick and easy resource to keep up to date with the changes in the market and strategy opportunities. The Robs give balanced viewpoints and make even the most dry aspects interesting. Thanks, Robs. Keep it going. We certainly will. And keep it going, Neil and Christina. That's absolutely awesome. Christina, well done on your first buy-to-let. Taking action. Bravo.
Okay, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Property Podcast. I'm sure there's something in there that you'll be able to take away and put to good use. Next week, we'll be doing it all again, as we have done for the last 5 years. Yep, the Property Podcast has been going for over 5 years now. Unbelievable. And lots of things have changed during that time. So next week, we're going to be picking out 5 things that have changed since the podcast started. That's going to be a really good one. And before then, on Tuesday, there's going to be Ask Rob and Rob, of course. So we'll see you soon. Until then, enjoy your journey. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Property Podcast. For show notes, all our past episodes, and to leave a review, go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast.